The rifle hit the table with a metallic thud, the sound carrying like a slap across the silent room. A few soldiers exchanged glances, some smirking, others pretending not to notice. The captain's voice followed, sharp, dismissive, almost mocking. "Fix it, if you can." The weapon before her was a Barrett MRAD, a precision instrument meant to extend the reach of a sniper's eye, but this one was locked tight, the bolt jammed, the kind of malfunction that rookies fumbled with under pressure. He hadn't handed it to one of the men in the circle. He hadn't even looked at them. He tossed it at her. Her gloved hands caught the rifle with quiet steadiness. She didn't speak. She didn't flinch. She lowered her eyes to the weapon as if the disrespect hadn't happened at all, as if it was just her and the rifle in the room. The silence deepened. A soldier in the back shifted, suppressing a grin. Another folded his arms, waiting for her to fail. That was the expectation. That was the sport of it. But she didn't fail. She pressed her thumb along the receiver, fingers tracing the cold, grooved steel, feeling the stiffness in the bolt as though listening to a body with a broken bone. The weapon smelled faintly of oil and iron, and beneath it, the bitter tang of scorched powder lingered from past rounds. She adjusted her grip, twisted, pressed with a precision that came from something far beyond training. A soldier could be taught mechanics. What she carried in her silence was deeper. Instinct, memory, the weight of necessity. The room grew quieter still. And then came the soft, clean click. The bolt freed. Her hands did not tremble. She slid the chamber open, inspected it, and closed it again. By the time she looked up, the captain's smirk had already faltered. She placed the rifle gently on the table, steadier than it had landed. And only then, as if fate itself had waited for the silence to thicken to glass, something slid from the fold of her sleeve, a small, worn coin. It spun once against the wood and landed flat, its surface scratched, its edges dulled. The soldiers who knew froze. Those who didn't, leaned in to see. The captain's eyes found it first, and in that instant, the color drained from his face. On that coin was no ordinary mark. Stamped into the metal were 3 digits. 87. 87 confirmed kills. Her name, though it carried little weight in the barracks, once carried storms across distant battlefields. She had been a sniper long before she was a curiosity among the ranks, long before mockery followed her into training rooms. Every fiber of her bore the residue of nights under desert skies, of patience stretched beyond sanity, of breaths measured between heartbeats. Years ago, she'd lain on ridges where the wind scraped dust against her cheek, holding her rifle steady for hours, waiting for a single human silhouette to shift in the scope. She remembered the smell of sand baked in sun, the rattle of insects in the silence, and the ache that lived permanently in her shoulders from carrying steel across continents. But what defined her wasn't the 87. It was the 88th she never took, the one target who carried a child across the street in her scope. She'd lowered the rifle that day, her fingers shaking not from fear but from refusal. Men around her had laughed later, saying hesitation was weakness. But she remembered how that child had looked up, clutching his father's shirt. She knew she had carried more honor in that pause than in every bullet that had ever found its mark. That choice haunted her, yes. But it also saved her. It tethered her humanity. The captain had known her file. He'd seen the commendations, though he skimmed them like irrelevant footnotes. What he saw instead was someone smaller, quieter, unassuming, a soldier who carried her silence like a defect. And to him, silence was weakness. He used her presence to entertain his men, to sharpen their egos against her quiet. The jammed MRAD was just another test, another attempt to remind everyone of the pecking order. But the coin had betrayed him, because the coin was not decoration. It was not trinket. It was a mark given only among snipers, one soldier to another, passed when numbers were carved into history itself. Each digit stamped was earned in a blur of dust, blood, and silence. Only those who lived long enough to accumulate them carried such weight. And she carried 87. One of the soldiers stepped forward, staring at the coin as if it radiated heat. He swallowed hard. He had been told rumors about a woman sniper whose confirmed kills outnumbered entire platoons. A ghost in desert wars. A shadow on mountain ridges. A story older recruits whispered like myth. And now she sat before them, fixing their rifles, absorbing their smirks. The injustice of it pressed like iron against the walls of the room. Some looked away, ashamed. Others stiffened, realizing they had been laughing at a legend. The captain, however, clenched his jaw, unwilling to yield. His pride was too brittle, too inflated. Tension simmered in silence. The soldiers didn't dare speak, but their eyes betrayed them. Respect began to shift, slipping from the captain's command and rooting itself in her calm. 87, someone whispered under his breath. The captain heard it. He knew control was slipping. And so, with brittle arrogance, he forced a chuckle. Numbers don't mean anything when the war's over. But even he felt the hollowness of the words. The room did too. Because war never ended for those who carried it inside. She didn't speak, not once. She let the coin remain where it had fallen, its etched digits burning into the wooden table like scripture. Her silence was heavier than the captain's words. It was a silence that said, "I do not need to defend myself. My history speaks in echoes you could never carry." It was a silence that whispered, "I have given pieces of my soul so that you could sit in this room without fear." It was a silence that thundered, "Respect is not requested. It is earned in blood, in patience, in scars you will never see." And then came the shift. One soldier, the youngest of them, stepped forward. He reached down, lifted the coin, and placed it back in front of her with both hands. No words, just a gesture. But in that gesture, the room broke. The other soldiers straightened, some placing hands to their sides in quiet salute. A few bowed their heads. Even those who had mocked her earlier now avoided her gaze, shame washing through them. The captain stood rigid, trapped in his own pride, but the power had already drained from him. His authority cracked not because she argued, but because she didn't. In that silence, every soldier understood one truth. Respect isn't granted by rank, one finally murmured, voice low. It's carved into the lives you've saved, and the lives you've carried. Another whispered, almost to himself, "Her silence speaks louder than our orders." And though she never said it aloud, every heart in the room felt her truth. The greatest battles are fought without witnesses. And the greatest victories leave no celebration. By the time she rose from her chair, the atmosphere had shifted. Completely. The coin remained on the table, but its weight filled the room like a monument. Soldiers stepped aside as she moved past them, not because she demanded it, but because they could not do otherwise. The captain's mouth tightened, but he said nothing. He couldn't. Because how does one argue with 87? How does one belittle a ghost who had once protected them all, silently, from beyond 1,000 yards? When she reached the doorway, the youngest soldier snapped into a salute. Slowly, one by one, the others followed. Until even the hesitant, even the ashamed, lifted hands to brows in silent respect. She didn't turn back. She didn't need to. The silence left behind was her victory. There are battles the world will never see. Battles fought not in daylight, but in silence. Carried by men and women who will never speak of what they've done. She was one of them. 87 confirmed kills. Not trophies. Not numbers to boast. But lives taken so others could live. Each digit a scar invisible to the eye, carved into her spirit. And yet, what defined her was not the 87. It was the silence she carried after. Because true strength doesn't demand recognition. It waits. It endures. And when challenged, it does not roar. It stands, unshakable, until even arrogance must bow. If you are watching this story now, ask yourself, how many silent heroes walk past us every day, carrying weights we could never imagine? Where are you watching from? What does respect mean to you? Share your thoughts below. And if stories like this move you, Stories that honor the silent, the unseen, the unforgettable. Subscribe so these voices are never left unheard again.